What's up, Steelers Nation? Today is game day, and later on we've got a big-time matchup, Pittsburgh Steelers versus Miami Dolphins. It's a night to put your heart on the field, physical defense, tradition, and football the way we love it. The Steelers come in looking to set the tone, playing with intensity from the first snap to the last, while Miami brings speed and a dangerous offense. This one will be a true test of nerves, strategy, and, of course, pure toughness. This is a big game, a playoff-type atmosphere. This is Steelers football. If you believe in this win, hit that like button, support the channel, and drop a comment below. What's your prediction for today's game? Who's going to be the difference maker? Welcome in, buckle up, and here we go, Steelers. The reality of where this team is right now becomes very clear when you slow down and really listen to what is being said inside the building, because none of this is coach speak designed to fill airtime. This is a snapshot of a Steelers team deep into December, where the margins are thin, the road is narrow, and every decision, every snap, and every role player matters more than it did back in September. When you look back at the Baltimore game, even though it feels like it happened weeks ago, the emphasis immediately goes to third down and how the Steelers handled the early environment. That opening stretch mattered, and it set a tone. The reason Brandon Echols comes up so quickly in that conversation is because his impact isn't loud, but it's consistent, and consistency is currency this time of year. Echols wasn't brought here by accident. The evaluation started a year ago when he was still with the Jets, lining up inside, outside, contributing on special teams, doing the unglamorous work that winning teams rely on. That versatility is now paying dividends because this defense has shifted pieces around, including moving Jalen Ramsey to safety, and when dominoes fall, someone has to be steady enough to absorb responsibility without disruption. Echols has done that. Outside corner, nickel, core special teams contributor, it hasn't mattered. He's been above the line in every role, and that tells you something about the profile this staff values when the season reaches this stage. You also saw that same theme play out on special teams in Baltimore, where injuries forced unexpected solutions. DK Metcalf lining up as a gunner wasn't scripted. It wasn't a package drawn up on a whiteboard. He volunteered. Jaylen Warren did the same on kickoff return. That detail matters because right now it's not about what players can do, it's about what they are willing to do. When the roster gets stressed, when bodies start to drop, willingness becomes just as important as talent. That willingness is what keeps teams alive in December. It's also part of why there's no appetite inside this building for excuses, especially when it comes to officiating. There were controversial calls in Baltimore, but there's a deliberate choice to move on. Calling New York doesn't change the result. Lingering on it doesn't help the next week. Leadership at this level is about absorbing frustration and redirecting it, because if the head coach dwells on it, the locker room will follow. That same honesty shows up when the conversation shifts to the numbers. Offensive plays per game, total net yards, time of possession. Being on the wrong side of those metrics isn't brushed off as meaningless. They're interconnected, and they speak directly to the war of attrition. When the offense isn't sustaining drives and the run game isn't where it needs to be, the defense pays the price. When the defense isn't stopping the run consistently, those numbers snowball. There's no isolating one issue and pretending the rest will fix itself. It's all tied together, and fixing it is part of what's required to push forward into what this team clearly views as a tournament mindset. That mindset also explains why players like Ben Skowronek have carved out meaningful roles. Waived by Houston, picked up for his toughness, his appetite for special teams, his willingness to tackle, he fits a familiar mold. Football player first, position second. He embraces the gritty parts of the game, leads the team in special teams tackles, and brings a physical edge when he's on the field as a receiver. Those players don't always show up in box scores, but they show up in December wins. They are the connective tissue that holds a roster together when injuries and fatigue hit. And then there's the veteran presence, particularly Aaron Rodgers, whose impact right now goes beyond mechanics or arm talent. What's different isn't his preparation, it's his urgency in educating younger players about what's at stake. This is the phase of the season where experience becomes a weapon. You can't teach what it feels like unless you've lived it. That's part of why he wanted to be here, why he accepted less to join a team position like this. These are the moments he's built for, and that hunger for meaningful football in December and January is contagious. All of that context feeds directly into the challenge ahead. Facing a left-handed quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa changes the geometry of the field. The spin of the ball, the direction of bootlegs, the stress placed on defenders who don't often see that look, it all requires immediate adaptation. There's no grace period on Monday Night Football. Add Devon Achane to that equation, with his track speed, perimeter dominance, and surprising power through contact, and you're dealing with a player who can flip momentum in a heartbeat. He isn't just fast, he's elusive, physical, and dangerous in space, similar in profile to backs the Steelers have already seen hurt defenses this season. Then layer in the reality of injuries along the offensive line. Broderick Jones and Calvin Anderson both on injured reserve. Andrus Peat signed late and now in the concussion protocol. Dylan Cook elevated midweek. This is where the standard is tested. Opportunity meets preparation, and it becomes a shared responsibility between coaching and player. Scheme has to protect, and the player has to deliver. There's no time to blink. Cold weather, national stage, late season urgency, all of it converging at once. With all of that in mind, when you take a step back and look at how this team is wired, how they're leaning on versatility, willingness, experience, and adaptability, do you feel confident that this approach is enough to carry the Steelers through the toughest stretch of the season? Or do you think something is still missing at this point? What becomes impossible to ignore at this stage is how every conversation circles back to survival, adjustment, and identity, because December football strips everything down to its core. Depth is no longer a theoretical concept discussed in August. It's real, it's immediate, and it's standing on the field when names higher on the depth chart are watching in street clothes. That situation at left tackle isn't just a roster note, it's a stress test for the entire operation. When a player like Dylan Cook is elevated midweek and suddenly becomes part of the plan, the response inside the building isn't panic. It's expectation, not blind expectation, but a calculated belief that if you prepare correctly and scheme intelligently, you can give anyone a chance to succeed. That philosophy only works if the locker room buys into it, and that buy-in is built long before the moment arrives. You see the same mentality reflected in how the Steelers prepare for environmental challenges. Cold weather isn't treated as an obstacle or a storyline internally. It's treated as a reality of doing business in Pittsburgh, practicing outside at Acrisure Stadium, embracing the conditions, understanding that discomfort is shared but familiarity is an advantage. All of that is part of a long-term cultural edge. For a team like Miami, coming from a warm weather environment, the adjustment is real, and history shows that those adjustments can linger if you're not accustomed to them. That doesn't mean weather wins games by itself, but it becomes another variable layered on top of everything else, especially when the stakes are this high. The most telling element through all of this, though, is how consistently the conversation returns to responsibility. Responsibility to teammates. Responsibility to preparation. Responsibility to move on from adversity without carrying it into the next snap. Whether it's refusing to dwell on officiating, asking star players to contribute on special teams, or challenging backups to be ready without apology, the message is the same. Nobody is insulated. Nobody is exempt. The standard doesn't lower because circumstances get difficult. If anything, it becomes sharper. That sharpness is also why the team struggles in areas like time of possession and rushing efficiency aren't dismissed or sugar-coated. They're acknowledged as interconnected problems that directly influence whether this team can control games late. Long defensive drives wear down even the best units. Short offensive possessions put pressure on margin for error. Fixing that isn't about one player or one call. It's about collective execution, especially in moments when fatigue sets in and discipline is tested. This is also where veteran leadership quietly shapes outcomes. When experienced players reinforce urgency in meetings, in practice tempo, in attention to detail, they're not doing it for motivational speeches. They're doing it because they understand how quickly seasons end when small lapses compound. Younger players feel that gravity, not through fear, but through clarity. They know what's at stake, and they know there's no runway left to figure it out later. As the Steelers push deeper into this stretch, everything feels compressed. Preparation windows are shorter. Recovery matters more. Roles can change in an instant, but there's also a sense that this is exactly the environment this organization believes it's built for. Adaptability over comfort, willingness over reputation, execution over explanation. Those themes aren't accidental. They're deliberate, and they're being tested in real time. Now it comes down to whether that foundation is strong enough to hold when the pressure peaks, the injuries pile up, and the margin for error disappears completely. If you've been watching this team closely, do you believe the Steelers have shown you enough resilience and adaptability to trust them in this moment? Or are there warning signs that concern you as the season reaches its most unforgiving phase? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button if this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, and keep an eye on the screen for the next video where we continue this conversation. When you stretch this conversation even further, what really defines this moment isn't a single matchup or a single injury. It's the accumulation of stress that reveals who a team truly is. This is the point of the season where preparation collides with reality, where plans are either validated or exposed. Every rep in practice, every meeting detail, every uncomfortable decision made back in training camp shows up now. You can feel that the Steelers understand that nothing about this stretch is supposed to feel comfortable. Comfort is usually a warning sign in December. One of the most important undercurrents here is trust. Trust between coaches and players, and trust among players themselves. When veterans volunteer for roles that are normally invisible, it sends a message that ripples through the locker room. It tells younger players that no task is beneath anyone, and no role is insignificant. That kind of trust doesn't guarantee wins, but it keeps teams from fracturing when adversity hits. And adversity has hit this roster in waves, from injuries up front to constant adjustments on defense. There's also an intellectual honesty happening behind the scenes that fans don't always get to see. Acknowledging deficiencies in ball control, in rushing efficiency, in defensive sustainability isn't weakness, it's clarity. Teams that pretend those issues don't matter usually get exposed by opponents who force them to defend for extended stretches. The Steelers aren't pretending, they're owning it, and ownership is the first step toward correction, even if the correction comes incrementally rather than all at once. You can sense that this group understands the tournament mentality now. Every week is its own season. Every game has its own emotional weight. There's no space left to circle future dates on the calendar or to rely on getting healthy later. Later isn't guaranteed. That urgency sharpens focus, but it also demands emotional control. Playing tight is just as dangerous as playing loose, and finding that balance is one of the hardest things to do under pressure. What makes this stretch fascinating is that the Steelers aren't being asked to reinvent themselves. They're being asked to lean harder into what they already claim to be: physical, disciplined, adaptable, team first. Those words get thrown around easily in the offseason. They're harder to live by when temperatures drop, bodies hurt, and national lights are on. But that's exactly when those traits are supposed to matter most. As this continues to unfold, the question isn't just whether the Steelers can win individual games. It's whether they can consistently impose their identity on opponents who know exactly what's coming. There are no surprises left in December. There's only execution, resilience, and belief-tested snap after snap. And sometimes, the most telling answer doesn't come from a final score, but from how a team responds when things don't go according to plan. As this stretch keeps unfolding, there's another layer that deserves attention, and it's the emotional discipline required to navigate games where momentum swings violently. December football rarely follows a clean script. Drives stall unexpectedly. Field position flips. A single missed assignment can undo a strong series. What separates teams that survive from teams that fade is how quickly they reset. The Steelers are clearly emphasizing that reset, not just between games, but between snaps. That's why the refusal to dwell on officiating, injuries, or external noise isn't just philosophical. It's practical. Emotional residue slows reaction time, and reaction time is everything when fatigue sets in. You can also see how roles have become more fluid out of necessity. Defensive backs moving across positions. Offensive skill players contributing on special teams. Depth linemen being asked to execute with precision despite limited in-game experience. This isn't chaos, it's controlled flexibility. It only works if the system is simple enough to absorb change and the players are accountable enough to execute it. That balance is hard to achieve, and it's one of the reasons so many teams unravel when attrition peaks. What stands out is how often the conversation returns to will, not talent, not scheme. Will, willingness to prepare, willingness to sacrifice comfort, willingness to embrace roles that don't come with headlines. That's not accidental language. It reflects an understanding that December football is less about expanding the playbook and more about tightening execution. You don't need more answers right now. You need sharper ones. There's also a subtle reminder here about patience. Not passive patience, but competitive patience. Understanding that games may not break open early. Understanding that weather, fatigue, and opponent adjustments can flatten tempo. The Steelers aren't chasing style points at this stage. They're chasing control. Control of the ball. Control of the environment. Control of their response when something goes wrong. That kind of control doesn't always look pretty, but it's often what keeps games within reach long enough for experience to matter late. As the schedule continues to compress and the physical toll increases, the spotlight will keep shifting to different parts of the roster. One week it's a corner stepping into a larger role. The next it's a wide receiver making a tackle on special teams. The week after that it's an offensive lineman most fans hadn't talked about in October. That's the reality of this phase, and it's also where organizational philosophy either holds up or collapses. So as you watch the next chapter play out, it's worth asking yourself whether what you're seeing aligns with what you believe this team is supposed to be. Not in theory, but in practice, under pressure, in discomfort, with everything condensed and exposed. Because this is the portion of the season where identities stop being claims and start being evidence. At this point, the season almost feels like it's speaking back to the team. Every adjustment is answered with another challenge, every solution immediately tested by a new variable. That's not bad luck. That's the league doing what it always does when teams push toward the edge of contention. The Steelers are living in that space right now, where there's no separation between preparation and performance. What you are on Sunday night is exactly what you were willing to become Monday through Saturday. There's a quiet pressure that comes with that reality, especially for a team that carries expectations tied to history. History doesn't block, tackle, or cover anyone. It only amplifies scrutiny. The interesting thing is that this group doesn't seem to be leaning on the past for confidence. Instead, they're leaning on habits. Habits of accountability, habits of physicality, habits of next man up thinking. Those habits are being stressed, but they're not breaking, and that matters more than any narrative outside the building. You can feel that the margin for error is shrinking, not just in terms of wins and losses, but in terms of how games are played. Early mistakes carry heavier consequences now. Missed tackles extend drives that exhaust a defense. Missed blocks shorten possessions that already feel too brief. That's why the focus on fundamentals hasn't wavered, even when the temptation exists to search for bigger answers. Big answers rarely survive December. Small, repeatable actions do. Another element that can't be ignored is how collective confidence is built differently this time of year. It's no longer about what you think you can do. It's about what you've already proven you can do under stress. That proof doesn't come from one clean performance. It comes from surviving ugly stretches, from responding after setbacks, from showing that adversity doesn't fracture communication or effort. That's where trust shows itself, not in celebrations, but in corrections. And corrections are happening constantly, on the sideline, in meeting rooms, on the practice field. The tone isn't panic, but it isn't comfort either. It's urgency without desperation, which is a hard line to walk. Teams that lose that balance often start chasing plays instead of letting the game come to them. Teams that hold it give themselves a chance late, even when the night has been uneven. What makes the next phase so compelling is that there's no hiding left. Personnel limitations are known. Strengths are on film. Weaknesses are targeted. Opponents aren't guessing anymore. They're attacking with intent. How the Steelers respond to that intent will define not just individual games, but how this season is ultimately remembered. So when you sit back and evaluate what you've seen up to this point, the question becomes less about ceiling and more about resolve. When the game tightens, when the weather worsens, when the roster thins, do you believe this team has the collective resolve to keep executing with clarity instead of urgency turning into chaos? And corrections are happening constantly, on the sideline, in meeting rooms, on the practice field. The tone isn't panic, but it isn't comfort either. It's urgency without desperation, which is a hard line to walk. Teams that lose that balance often start chasing plays instead of letting the game come to them. Teams that hold it give themselves a chance late, even when the night has been uneven. What makes the next phase so compelling is that there's no hiding left. Personnel limitations are known. Strengths are on film. Weaknesses are targeted. Opponents aren't guessing anymore. They're attacking with intent. How the Steelers respond to that intent will define not just